Talks. I'm the chair of Toronto Talks, and I'd like to welcome you. Tonight we have a great session. We've got Don Frail with Unleashing Greatness. And, interestingly, I'll just share with you something that happened to me about a month ago. I went to get a haircut, and I was in the barber shop. And my barber is a bit of a shenanigan, a bit of a jokester. Anyway, this kid walks in, and my barber whispers to me, says, this young boy says, "This kid's not really bright. I'll show you." So what he does is he takes out a $5 bill and a toonie, and he says to the kid, "Pick one of them. You get to take whatever one you want." So the boy, takes the toonie. I'll pick that up. And so he's stuck with the $5 bill. So the barber turns to me and says, "See, kid's not very bright." And so anyway, I got my hair cut and I walked out, and there is the kid with an ice cream cone. And I said to him, "Son, why did you take the toonie over the $5 bill?" And the boy turned to me and he said, "Because the game's over when I take that $5 bill from him." So talking about, you like that? Well, that's why you pay the big bucks to come here. It's all in the delivery. So, by the way, I've been really thinking about tonight's talk about greatness. And what I did was, I'm standing in front of the TV. Can I move this a little bit? Or can I pick this up? You? Okay. Whoa. What's that? Oh, look at that glass. Isn't that exciting? Okay. So, what I did was, you can move this if you're a gymnastic. What I did was I Googled the word great. And I don't know if you know this, there are 4.6 billion references on Google to great. Really a lot. And here are some definitions of great. I'll just read them to you. So, very large in size, of outstanding significance or importance. So how many of you want to be outstanding or significant, right? Chief or principal. Great adjectives, right? Superior in quality and character. I just thought, what a great topic. Who doesn't want this? Powerful and influential. Well, that's all of you. Eminent and distinguished, right? And finally, pregnant. This is all in the dictionary, okay? So, let me get that. For those of you who are new, what's Toronto Talks all about? Well, I think Toronto Talks is about greatness. I really do. It's a not-for-profit speaking series that allows you to hear from experts in and around the GTA. We started this in 2001. We've run over 100 speakers through this system. We've had great topics. We've had everything from coaches to entrepreneurs. We had an entrepreneurial series where, very much motivated by my friend Drew Huffman, who said, let's get some serious business people out there. And we did. We got a couple of multi-millionaires who came out and told some great stories about their businesses and how they built them. We're trying to do that. Tax planning, finances, e-commerce, everything. And so anyway, to attend Toronto Talks for free, you have to be a member of one of our affiliated associations. And there's a bunch of them. I know you can all see it from there, right? You're associate. It's there. If you see, BPA is going to be on there. This is kind of loud. But anyway, people here are from all sorts of different associations, and we encourage you to stay involved with your association. Keep paying your annual dues. Like for PMI, keep paying your annual dues because you can attend Toronto Talks free of charge. Typically, we charge $30, and we put this on. We're trying to put it on 8 to 10 times a year. So that's that's $250 to $300 of value. When they ask you for, what is PMI charging, Michael? What do they charge every year to join? There you go. So this pays for that. You bring that up at the next board meeting. Tell Sherry Bricks I said that. You got it. The other thing is, too, because we are made up of people from all sorts of different associations, the feedback we get from everyone who attends these things, they want a little bit of time to networking. So let's take a few minutes out. I'd like you to introduce yourself to someone you don't know. Find out what they do, get a business card, and I have a question for each of you. You should turn to the person and say, so what's so great about you? Okay? On that note, let's take a few minutes and meet somebody new. Okay. So anyway, that's a little sample. Does everyone like that kind of meeting somebody new? Isn't that kind of refreshing? And anyone hear any great stories they want to share? Okay, all right. Because it's not live and like no one's going to hear it. All right. Anyway, just to give you a heads up, our next event is Tuesday, November 26th. It is 3 massive marketing mistakes that coaches, consultants, and business owners are making that can put them out of business. I was pointing to you because I know you're a coach, with Rhonda Page. Now, Rhonda is a branding expert. She's written this book, Know Your Difference. I've known Rhonda since I've been about 10. She's amazing. She's in two. Do you know her? Yeah. Okay. So you're going to come, right? Okay. Anyway, how many of you have issues with branding? Show of hands. I think we all do, right? Okay. So I think you should all come out for that, and you should tell your friends. And anyone who's here, if you want to bring a friend, they come free of charge. I just throw that out to you. Okay, and otherwise you have to pay $30. And by the way, Eugene is in the cash business. He has cash machines, so if anyone came short tonight. That's right. Okay. So let me just go through this. So we have a website. I need to update it. I know that. And I call it, it's torontotalks.org. How many of you are registered on the website? Quick show of hands. Okay, if you're not, go to Toronto Talks, sign up. You'll end up on our mailing list, and when you're fed up with me, you can unsubscribe. We do all sorts of things, PowerPoints. We're going to be posting this presentation on the website as soon as it's edited and ready for TV. We also have our own show, 5 Minute Financial. You can check that out on the site as well, and bios and PowerPoints, etc. So I also wanted to just say, so it's a homegrown series, right? So what we do is Toronto Talks has always been about someone who somebody knows coming out and speaking. We don't pay our speakers because what we do is we basically don't charge anything. And if we do, it's a loony or toonie towards Children's Make-A-Wish Foundation. So if any of you know of any great speakers, please let us know, because that's how we get people to come out. And we've just had some great presentations. So I throw that out to you. There's our email and our phone number and all that stuff. As well, we want to thank some people. So you're all on my mailing list. And Thin Data allows us the technology to do these blasts. The mailing list is about 6,000 people. And it would really be impossible to send it out to everybody without a lot of technology. They have a great job, and we appreciate their support in using their technology. I'd also like a quick word about our potentially new home. We are trying this out. By the way, what do you guys think of this so far? Is it a pretty cool place? Show of hands. Okay. So it's a new space, thatchannel.com. Hugh and I have been working together for a number of years. I've had a number of shows with him. And I just think it's a really neat space. They're brand new in here. I know the chairs are interesting. But this place has a lot of potential, and that's why I wanted to develop this with them. The idea with this Toronto Talks is we're going to tape it, and we are going to edit it, and we're going to try and sell it to Rogers. That's kind of the plan. Right, Hugh? So that's the direction I'm going in. Hugh, do you want to come up here and say a few words just to...
Thank you, John.
All right, you're welcome.
So, hey, there's a toonie down here.
Yeah.
I want to welcome John here. I remember the first time I heard about John, it was a guy I went to high school with invited me to this Toronto Talks, and it was down at Metro Hall, and it was many years ago, John. The time has just flown by. And I thought, and I was doing that channel as a radio station at the time, and I thought what John was doing was the perfect content for the radio. Why restrict the conversation to that little room at Metro Hall? We should put it out on the internet, get the word out. And now here we are a few years later, and TED Talks is all the rage. But I've really only heard of TED Talks for the last couple of years. I heard about John and Toronto Talks many years before that. So we're really glad to be doing this here tonight as an experiment to see if this works as a TV show, and I think it does. And I just want to say thanks for coming. Welcome to that channel. And I'm going to hand this back to you, John, and I'm looking forward to our talk by Don here tonight.
Great. Thank you. Can I have that toonie back? Thank you. Not that dumb kid, you know. Anyway, so thanks, Hugh. And I think, like, if any of you, Hugh's been great. I mean, if any of you need promotional videos or anything, man, this is a neat place to do it at. You don't need to be a multimillionaire to have your own show anymore, which is kind of neat. I'd also like to say we support a charity. So everyone came here tonight for free. And if you did, that's great. All we ask, drop a loonie or toonie in the bin and make that, what we do is we give that to the we used to support Camp Uchigais. We changed about 2 or 3 years ago to Make-A-Wish just because it's time for a change. And it's a great charity. You know, kids are sick and they get to do things like meet baseball players. And I think that's great. You know, go to Florida or whatever, to Disney World. Really, really neat cause. So keep it up and we'll try and support them. So I also wanted to say, so someone has to pay for all this. There's expenses into running this event every month. There's a website, there's email, there's all the materials that go into something like this. Well, that's us. So my firm is Northwood Mortgage Life and also Investment Planning Council. And I just wanted to talk briefly. We offer something called, that's very interesting for people who are self-employed. How many have self-employed hands? Here, show of hands here. Okay, so we have something called the health spending account. And what it does is it allows you to deduct all your sort of non-insurance related medical expenses. And so there's certain things like dental insurance that's not really insurance at all. It's just an expense. You should be deducting that if you're a business owner. And this allows you to do it in a tax-efficient manner, and at the same time it has a extensive catastrophic drug and medical plan on it as well. So anyway, I've included some information. Feel free to speak with me about it, and you can check it out at our website at northwoodmortgagelife.com. And now, on to the show. Because, oh, here's some logoing. Okay. Because the person you came to hear is Don Frail. Let me just, I've memorized this to the best of my ability, but I can't remember any of it. So, anyway, Dawn is the president of Eagle Vision Leadership Development Group. And this is what she does. She goes around. She is a leadership consultant. She goes around motivating people to increase their profits and make companies more efficient. She is an award-winning author and trainer. She has done this all over the place, all over Canada and the United States. She has a master's degree from the University of Guelph, and also she has an additional training on top of that. I think you went to DeVry and U of T, adult training and development as well. She's written 2 books, The 10 Commandments of Ethical Leadership and The Heart Method. And she also co-authored a paper, I believe, called 10 Principles Every CEO Must Know to Win and Play. I'd like to read that paper, by the way. I think that's really cool. She did some work with Stephen Covey, if I'm right, and she was selected to be one, I believe it's one of 10 people around the world to work on this sort of exclusive Stephen Covey 7 Habits of Highly Effective Leaders. So she's a real winner, and that sort of came out from her biography. She is also, amongst this, the mother of 4 boys, and she's about to become a grandmother too. I was surprised to hear the age of her son because she looks younger than that. But anyway, I'm one of 4 boys, so I had a lot of empathy for her. And anyway, that being said, I think we're in for a real treat tonight. Dawn's going to come and share with us how to unleash greatness. So without further ado, Dawn Frail.
Inside each one of us lie seeds of greatness. They are our gifts and our talents. They're our opportunities and our potential. They're what make me uniquely me, and they're what make you uniquely you. And our job is to figure out what our seeds are, and then to nurture them, to grow them, and to develop them, and to unleash them. Now, for some people, recognizing what their seeds are is a little bit easier. Some people are talented artists, or gifted musicians, or natural athletes. But for the rest of us, it takes a little bit more work to try and figure it out. But fortunately, there are clues. And these clues are like a map. And if we can learn to recognize these clues in ourselves and in other people, and when we do that, then we're able to be more successful and happier in our personal lives, with our family and our friends, in our professional lives, with our businesses, and in our careers. Now this map, it's called Myers-Briggs. And it's a way to understand people. And it explains why we think the way we think and why we behave the way we do. Now this map is made up of personality preferences. And it's those preferences that influence the way we think and act. And I'd like you to think of these preferences like your preference for being either left-handed or right-handed. Now, take a pen, if you would please, and find something to write on. And if you would please, sign your name as you normally do. Once you've done that, put your pen in your opposite hand and sign your name again. You can do it. Come on. Sign your name again. Now, when I do this exercise in the workshops that I do, I ask people to describe the difference between those two experiences. And what I frequently hear are things like, well, the first time I wrote it, it was easy. I didn't even have to think about it. I just took up the pen, it was automatic, and I just wrote it. And it was, maybe even a little bit fun. If you have one of those creative kind of signatures, maybe you look and admire with pride the result of what you've created. But then when people describe the second experience, they say things like, oh, felt awkward. It was a bit frustrating, not natural at all. I had to really think about it. It took me longer. And the quality, it looks pretty messy. Well, our personality preferences are very similar to this. In each of 4 areas, we have a choice of 2 preferences. And we naturally prefer one over the other. But the interesting thing is that 4 areas times 2 preferences, we have 8 altogether. But we can and we do use all 8 and can do so whenever we choose. Just like, barring any injuries, you can choose to write with your left hand or your right hand, regardless of which hand you normally use. At any time, you can choose to use your opposite hand, right? Well, your personality preferences are exactly the same. You can choose to use any of the 8 at any time. When you choose the 4 that are the preferred 4, it's like you're writing with your preferred hand. It comes naturally, it flows, it's easy, the quality is good, and it just feels natural and comfortable. But when you choose to use the other 4, it's like writing with your non-preferred hand. And it takes a bit longer, the quality isn't there, it's a bit more stressful, it's uncomfortable and a bit awkward. So what we're going to do today is we're going to take a look at our personality maps. Because when we are in an environment or in a situation where we have the opportunity to use all of our preferences, then that's when we are at our best. That's when we are performing at our peak. Now imagine your life if you could know and understand your own personality map. And imagine if you could take that knowledge and choose a career where you had the opportunity to use those preferences on a regular basis. You could get things done quickly with less effort. Life would be fun. Imagine if you could know and understand the personality map of other people. Think about your boss or somebody that you work with. How would your life be different if you could know and understand why do they think the way they think and why do they do those things that they do? How would your life be different if you could understand that? What about at home, in your family? your spouse or your significant other or your children? What would your life be like if you could finally figure them out? At work, those people that you work with, the ones on your team or in other departments, especially those ones that are just a bit difficult to get along with. Oh yeah, oh, you know who I'm talking about. I know you all do, don't I? You know exactly who I mean. What would your life be like if you could figure out how to get along with and how to deal with those people? Well, when we understand our personality maps, we are happier because we understand ourselves better. And we are more successful because we understand other people better. To unleash greatness means that we can understand what our strengths are, what our talents are, what our gifts are. We can capitalize on them and we can leverage them. Great interpersonal skills and the ability to influence others requires that we understand our own personalities and the personalities of the people that we're dealing with. And when we're in that space and when we're able to do that, now we have the ability to unleash greatness in ourselves and unleash greatness in other people. Now, if your success, if your happiness depends to any degree on your ability to interact with other people, then this is for you. So let's figure out what your personality map is. Is that something that would be helpful to you? Is that something that you would like to know? Well, let me give you an overview of the 4 areas that I already mentioned. And then once I've done that, I'm going to go into more detail in each of the 4. But first, let me give you the 4 areas and what the preferences are between the 2. The first area is, in the Myers-Briggs world, where do you get your energy from? How do you recharge your batteries? The choices are either introversion or extroversion. Somebody who has an introversion preference gets their energy from the inside world of thoughts and feelings and memories and ideas. The other side of that is the extroversion preference, and people who have that preference are energized by the outside world of activity and people and action. So the first area is, how do you recharge your batteries? Where do you get your energy from? Inside or outside? The second area is, how does your brain prefer to bring in information? The choices here are sensing or intuition. If you have a sensing preference, you like to bring in information in a detailed, factual, and concrete kind of way. You want to know the specifics and you want to know something in its present focus. If, on the other hand, you have a preference for intuition, then you like to bring in information that's big picture, and it's about new possibilities and it's future-oriented. The decision-making process is the third area. And the decision-making process is a choice between thinking or feeling. If you have a thinking decision-making process, then you rely on logic and on your ability to analyze and critique in order to make decisions. But if, on the other hand, you have a feeling preference when it comes to your decision-making process, then you have a more empathetic and subjective way to come to conclusions and to make decisions. And the fourth and final area is about your lifestyle. How is it that you like to manage and organize your life? The choices here are between judging and perceiving. If you prefer a judging lifestyle, then you like to live your life in a structured and a planned and in an organized way. If, on the other hand, you like to live your life in a more flexible, spontaneous, open-ended kind of way, then that is a perceiving lifestyle. So we have 4 areas, 2 choices each. Your energy, what recharges your batteries, how your brain likes to bring in information, the decision-making process that your brain goes through to decide, and the way you like to organize your life. So those are the 4 areas. Now, when we identify what our maps are, we can figure out of all of these 8 choices, which are our preferred 4 compared to which are our non-preferred 4. Now, sometimes what happens is when we're trying to decide what's our preference, sometimes it's crystal clear. And the difference is so obvious we know absolutely this is the one that I prefer. But sometimes the difference is much smaller and very slight. And so you may say, well, geez, I don't know. I can relate to both of those things that you're describing, and I'm not sure which is more like me. Well, if you find yourself in some of the 4 areas where it's quite obvious, and in other of the areas it's not obvious at all, then know that that's normal. It's just like in the signatures. If we were to pass around everybody's signatures, we would notice that some were vastly different, and some were really quite similar. And when it comes to preferences in our personalities, that's the way it is in that scenario as well. So how we're going to do this is I'm going to be telling you the story of 2 particular people. And these 2 people have opposite preferences. In everything that they do, in every way that they behave, they're totally opposite. And your job will be to listen to my description of the 2 different people and to ask yourself and to try to decide which one of the people that Don's describing feels more like me. Which one sounds more like me? Which one relates to the stories of my life based on what she's saying? And at the end, what you'll have is a personality map, and we're going to talk about how we can use that map and how we can use that information to help you be more successful in all areas of your life. So the 2 people that I'm going to use are myself and a very dear friend named Bill. Now, I used to work for Bill many years ago, my last corporate job actually, and he was my boss. And our relationship, I will admit, started out quite rocky, as many relationships do when personalities are totally opposite. What we learned and what we were able to do was to take these differences, and instead of having them cause us to be fighting and clashing and arguing, we allowed them to create this synergy whereby we became quite an incredible team. And we were a small department, and so there weren't very many of us. And so the fact that we needed to get along was pretty important. And we were able to do that. And the good news is that we're very good friends to this very day. But the interesting thing about Bill and I is that our personalities are absolutely opposite. And so I'm going to use the story of my working relationship and my life with Bill to help you identify what the differences are between the personality preferences. So if you're ready, let's start. Where do you get your energy from? How do you recharge your batteries? That's the first area that we'll look at when it comes to our personality map. Now, as I said, introversion and extroversion are our 2 choices. I have a very clear preference for introversion. My energy comes from inside, from a world of thoughts and ideas and memories. And I tend to be a very reflective person. I'm fairly quiet. If I'm in a room full of strangers, I may be the person sort of standing there listening, because as an introvert, I tend to listen more than I tend to talk. And so perhaps you're like that, or you know people like that, where people would rather listen, and if you're in a meeting, you'll notice that there are people who love to talk and there are people who love to listen. Well, those people who love to listen, chances are they have a preference for introversion. And that's definitely me. So what else describes me as far as being an introvert? Well, I have a very narrow band of interests, and that's very common for people who have a preference for introversion. While we have a very narrow band of interests, our interests go very, very deep. And so I may only have a great deal of knowledge in a couple of areas, but by golly, in those areas, I could probably talk for a long, long, long time, because I like to really go deep in those areas of interest that I have. Because I'm a reflective thinker, I prefer to communicate in writing. So if I'm going to communicate with somebody, I'm likely going to send an email rather than pick up the telephone and call or go and visit somebody in their office. Because I like the reflective way of thinking, writing an email gives me that opportunity to review and edit and make sure the words are there and the way I want them to be before I actually send my message out. I do that because I have a preference for introversion. When it comes to friends, I have a lot of acquaintances and I know a lot of people, but I have relatively few what I would call close friends. So I prefer smaller groups. While I absolutely can function in an environment where there's lots of people, I'm more energized when I'm in a small group of people. Now, when I contrast my introversion to Bill's extroversion, Bill gets his energy from the outside world of people and activities, and he is always on the go. He is very talkative, and he tends to talk and think out loud. I don't know if you are like this or if you've ever met anybody who starts to talk, and it's only once they begin to talk that their ideas begin to formulate. And that was my Bill. He would think out loud, and the more he talked, the more his ideas came together, and the more he was able to communicate, and the more energized and the more excited he got, because telling his stories and being surrounded by people and lots of people energized him, and you could literally see his energy go up. When it came to the number of interests that Bill had an interest in absolutely everything. His interests were very, very wide. Now, only maybe in one or two areas could he go very deep, but he knew a little bit about a lot of things, whereas I know a lot about a few things. When it comes to knowing people and having friends, Bill has a million friends. It never ceased to amaze me how he would go away on vacation and he would come back and he would tell stories about how he was in some foreign country and he was in the airport and he saw this person and then he sat and had coffee because he's a friend. And then he was in another place and he met another friend, and then he was in another airport and then he met that friend. And just listening to his stories and the amount of energy and the number of people that he knew was really quite extraordinary. And for him, he doesn't call these acquaintances, he calls all of these people friends, close friends. To Bill, an intimate party is probably a gathering of about 30, 40 people. A big party's got a couple of hundred. A big party, it's loud and it's energetic, and by the time the party's done, he is ready for the after party. He is the after party. For me, my perfect party is an intimate gathering of maybe 3, 4, 5, 6 people, maybe at the most. That's my perfect party. And we have an opportunity to, chat, and it's a little bit more subdued, and it's not as loud, and we can talk and chit-chat and visit and get into some of those, deep intellectual conversations. For me, that's the ideal party. So between Bill and I, we have very different ways of recharging our batteries and very different ways of being energized. Now, the interesting thing about people is that when we have these two come together, it can be a bit challenging. So if you think about your business, if you think about being at work, if you think about your family or being at home, and you think about the challenges that we have, we call those personality conflicts. You know what I'm talking about, right? Where we just seem to have an issue and we're just not sure how to deal with it, and so we just chalk it up to a personality conflict. Well, when we understand where people are coming from, now we can make a huge impact in reducing the amount of conflict that we have in our lives, improving our ability to communicate, because we now understand the other person's perspective. When I first started working for Bill, one of our challenges was, because it was a fairly small department, whenever Bill wanted something done, I was the person who needed to do it. Bill was a think out loud kind of guy. He would sit down and he would say, you know what we should do, Don? This is what we should do. And he would start with this wonderful idea of how we could really make an impact. Not understanding the think out loud element of Bill's personality, and being the only person who would be responsible to implement Bill's ideas, what did I do? I got up, I left his office, and I went and did what it was that he had asked me to do. Then, with a great sense of pride, I would go back to his office and say, okay, it's done. And I remember the first time he looked at me and he said, what'd you do that for? Because you told me to. No, I didn't tell you to. I said, yes, Bill, you did. And of course, being the dutiful person who would always take the notes, I had my notes and my papers and my booklets, and I said, on such and such a date, at such and such a time, we had a meeting in your office at this location, and this is what you told me to do, and I had it all written down. And he said, oh, well, those were just ideas. We were just thinking out loud. It was that moment, very early in our relationship, where I realized something had to happen, and if it didn't, one of us was going to have to go. And the person who has to go is not usually the boss. So I knew that I had to get this figured out, because there's no way that I could be spending my time going and implementing all of his ideas to come back and have him say, I'm only thinking out loud. So what we did was we came up with an agreement. And our agreement was, for the both of us to be more effective and more successful, our agreement was, when Bill was just tossing out ideas and was just thinking out loud, he would say to me, Dawn, just thinking out loud. At that point, I would put down my pen. Now, if he did not see me put down my pen, the message did not get through to me that we were just thinking out loud here. But when I put down my pen, he knew that I was not writing down instructions, that he was just thinking out loud. So we came up with these agreements, but it required us to understand what was happening in each of our personalities in order to come up with that agreement in the first place. One of the things that I found challenging about Bill was that he talked a lot. As an extrovert, that's what he did naturally. As an introvert, my inclination is to listen a lot. When we're having a conversation where both of us need to talk, as an introvert, I like to process my ideas inside my head. I need a split second or two of silence in order to let them really formulate. And then I'm able to share my thoughts, share my ideas, give my opinions, answer the questions. But a lot of times, Bill would see that split second of silence, and that was a huge flashing invitation to talk in his mind. As soon as he would start to talk, my thought process would shut down. And I had a hard time keeping my thinking going. And so in order for me to be successful in answering his questions and getting my thoughts out as an introvert, we had another agreement. And this other agreement was that if I was thinking and Bill interrupted me and started to talk, and I needed him to stop talking, our agreement was that I would put up my hand and I would say, processing. And that was our agreed way of him hushing and being nice and quiet so that I could finish my thinking. Now, if we're talking back and forth and, we've got that energetic thing going and I'm not, putting on my hand and saying, not processing, then it's all good to go and he's more than welcome to continue to interrupt me because it's a great back and forth. But when I need time to think as an introvert, processing. When he's just thinking out loud, Dawn just thinking out loud. So when it comes to things like introversion and extroversion, we need to have these agreements with people with whom we have a very different personality preference or a very different personality type. Because when we don't, what happens? Well, we make these assumptions about why people think the way we think and why people do the things that they do. And a lot of times we're wrong, aren't we? The assumptions that we make about people. And it's those assumptions that can get us into trouble and cause conflict and cause strife in teams just to grow and to build and to be such a mess that the team begins to have a hard time functioning. And really, the root of the problem is that we have different communication styles. And we have different ways of recharging our batteries. And we have different ways of being energized. And we have different ways of being who we are. So if you think about introversion or extroversion, and you think about your own personality map, which one sounds more like you? Does it sound more like you that you're energized from the inside, by thoughts and feelings, and, you can concentrate and you like to listen and you tend to communicate in writing? Or does extroversion sound more like you, where you're energized by people and activities and actions, and you tend to jump into things and you love to, get going and being around people? So which of those is on your personality map? Think about, then, your boss. One of the most important concepts in leadership today is the ability to manage your manager. Long gone are the days when the manager sort of knew everything and would tell the worker bees, what to do, and would coordinate the work and would coordinate the efforts and would be there for, feedback and questions and all of those things. They were there to manage the people. Well, that's not what the world looks like anymore, is it? We're on our own. We're looking after ourselves. We work in a virtual environment. We may not even see our boss for goodness knows how long. And so we need to be able to manage ourselves. And in order to have a successful career, we need to be able to manage that relationship that we have with our boss. And part of your ability to successfully manage that relationship will be to understand what are the pieces on your boss's personality map. So is your boss an introvert or an extrovert? And it's not about being shy, it's not about being outgoing, it's about how do they recharge their batteries? Where do they get their energy from? So think about that. Think about the people in your family. When you go to that family reunion or you go to that holiday event, a birthday party or something, and there's, that aunt or that uncle that as soon as you see them, you just want to go the opposite direction. Ask yourself, what's their personality map? And maybe even use that relative for a little bit of an experiment. Because if it fails, no great loss. You didn't like them anyway. What's your personality map and what's their personality map? And can you recognize some of the clues and see what's going on? So introversion or extroversion? That is the first element of the personality map. The second area on the personality map is how does your brain like to bring in information? Sensing and intuition were two choices. I have a preference for sensing. I am the detail person. I like the facts. I like the figures. My background is finance and IT, and I am proudly describing myself as a stereotypical techie bean counter. Now, if you have a background in either finance or IT, then you know exactly what I mean by a techie bean counter. And I love the numbers. I love the data. I live for project plans. Spreadsheets, the bigger the better. When I did my master's degree, I'm writing my thesis. I took over the floor of our rec room, hardwood floor, and I had about 1,000 Post-it notes. And on every single one of these Post-it notes was one little piece of information. And I put all of these Post-it notes on the floor, and I moved them, and I organized them, and I rearranged them. And from there, was able to build up into a thesis? Well, Bill has a preference for intuition. He's a big picture guy. He likes to see everything in bigger context and in what's the pattern and what's the relationship. I took a picture of my floor with all of the Post-it notes on it, and I sent it to Bill. Of course, I sent it in an email. Naturally, he picked up the phone and he called me. Seeing his name, I actually answered the phone. And I said, "So, did you get my picture?" And all I heard on the other end was, "Ah!" Whenever I would bring detailed information to Bill, his eyes would glaze over. He had a plastered grin on his face, and he had this ceremonial nod. When I was done, my presenting of the details, he would say, "Okay, Dawn, what does it all mean?" And when I began to answer that question, that's when he began to get engaged, and that's when he could hear me and could understand me. Because Bill would get bored by the details. And if you have a preference for intuition, maybe you get bored by the details too. And people like me, we are the bane of your existence. We come at you with all of the numbers and the charts and the diagrams and all of this stuff, and all you want to know is, what's the connection between those pieces of information? What's your interpretation? What does that information mean? I also like information that's very focused in the present. I want to know what's real, what's tangible, what's happening right now. So if I were sitting in the audience where you are, I would be thinking to myself, okay, I'm getting this introversion, extroversion, got that. Getting, this sensing, intuition, but what can I do with it right now? How does it apply to my life where I'm currently at? And I'd be trying to make those connections. If Bill was in the audience, he would be thinking, okay, introversion, extroversion, got that. Sensing, intuition, got that. Okay, what does that mean to me in the future? How can I use that in some other scenario other than where I am right now? So Bill's focus was very future-oriented with the information that he wanted. My focus was very present-time oriented. What about you? When you like to bring in information, if you're trying to learn something new, if you're asking questions of people, how do you like to get the information? Do you like all of the little details? And you like to see those pieces of information and you build up towards a conclusion? Or are you like Bill? Do you like to have the big picture, the big umbrella at the very top, and from there, if you have a question, if there's blanks to be filled in, then you'll ask the questions. And only then. That's how you'll understand and how you'll make those connections. I'm a very, as a sensor, linear thinker. Finance. 1 + 1 + 1 always equals 3. You start at step 1, and then you go to step 2, and then you go to step 3, and only then do you go to step 4. That's a sign of somebody who has a sensing preference. Bill, on the other hand, would jump in wherever he happened to see an opening, whether it was step 3, whether it was point Z, didn't matter. He would jump in wherever he found an interest or an opening, and from there would let things evolve and let information come to him. So have you ever seen one of those mind maps where you have an idea that's in the middle of your piece of paper, and then you have different branches that whatever idea comes to you, you just fill it in. You have an idea here, and you have an idea here, then you have an idea here. That's how Bill's brain worked. He would start at a point, and it would be like popcorn that the information would fill in. And that was very different than my way, which was start at step number 1, go to step number 2, go to step number 3, etc. Now imagine when we're trying to figure things out, and we're working together, and we're trying to come up with ideas in how to create a leadership program, which was what we did in this large company. He would start in the middle and would go all over the place. I wanted to start at the very beginning. He wanted to sometimes start at the very end and work backwards. And so our differences in how we approached problems, in how we came at information, was very different. The other interesting thing about the difference between people who have a sensing preference and people who have an intuition preference is that if you have a sensing preference, like I do, you tend to trust your experience. If something worked for me in the past and I'm in the same situation today, I am highly likely to do exactly what I did back then, trusting that it will work again. The opposite was Bill. Bill trusted his intuition, his inspiration. Whatever his gut said, that's what he trusted, and that's what he went with. If you go into a restaurant and you always order the same thing because you trust that you know what you're going to get and you know that you're going to enjoy it, and yes, maybe there's something on the menu that maybe piques your interest, or you think perhaps this time I'll order it, but no, you end up and you order the same thing you always order and you enjoy it just as you always enjoyed it, maybe you have a preference for sensing. If you're like Bill, you go to a restaurant, and first of all, you always order last. Because what you're waiting for is inspiration. As all the other people go around the table and order, you're looking for that flash of, oh, that sounds great. And if nothing comes to you, then you look at the menu and you pick something. And if you just go with what your gut says, and that's what you trust, and that's what works for you, chances are pretty darn good you have a preference for intuition. Now, these two styles trying to work together can sometimes create havoc. If you're the boss, you get it your own way. You're lucky. But if you're on a team, if you're working on a project where you have responsibility for or with people over whom you have no authority, you've got to find a way to work together. And getting information in, sufficient information, to make sure that the project moves along and you get the information that you need can sometimes be challenging. So if you're in the early stages of something and you find that, as conversations are getting a bit heated and people are starting to get a little bit frustrated with each other, are you looking at big picture people and detail people trying to hash things out and are rubbing up against each other? So we've covered two areas so far. First is, where do you get your energy from? Are you an inside intuition or an outside extroversion? What is the way your brain prefers to bring in information? Are you a detailed sensing person? Are you a big picture intuition person? The third one is about, now that you've got that information, what's the process that your brain goes through in order to make a decision? The choices are between thinking and feeling. As a thinking preference, which is me, I like to rely on logic. If it makes sense, if there's a rule that applies, if there is a precedent that has been set, to me, then that's logical that that's the path that we'll follow and that's the decision that we'll make this time. Bill had a feeling preference for making decisions. Regardless of what the rules were, regardless of what we did last time, every decision in Bill's mind was a brand new decision. Everything was subjective. And in every decision, we always say, well, how would you decide? Would you go this way or would you go that way? And we always say, well, it depends. And it's true. Everything is situational. It always depends. For me, a thinking type, it depends on what's the situation. For Bill, a feeling type, it depends on who are the people that are involved. Because somebody who has a preference for feeling in making decisions wants to make sure that people are honored and decisions are made based on valuing the individuality and the respecting of people. And that trumps over something that in my world would say, okay, well, let's make a list of pros and cons. Let's look at the cause and effect. Let's do the if-then-else and just figure out what's going to happen if we make this decision. And I'm looking at it from a logical, objective point of view. Bill, who was bald by choice, is how he liked to describe it, had a tell. I don't know if any of you are poker players in the room, but a tell is a sign that somebody's either, nervous, or maybe they're telling a fib, or they're trying to fool you. But a tell is something that gives away what's really going on inside. When Bill would get frustrated with me, and remember, we're opposite in all 4 areas, and so Bill would frequently get frustrated with me. When Bill would get frustrated with me, he'd put his head down and he would begin to rub. If Bill's head was particularly shiny on any particular day, I knew that I had done too much to annoy him and I needed to back off. Because that was his tell. He would rub his head. And that's how I knew that he was having some frustration with me. Maybe he was thinking. When it comes to making decisions, because we had 2 totally opposite ways of making decisions, this is where we really had to draw on every ounce of energy that we had in order to make sure that we didn't get into battles that we just could not unlock. Bill's decisions were very much about honoring people. And how would people be impacted by this decision? This is what Bill wanted to know. All I wanted to know was, what's the rule? How is the standard to be applied to this situation? See, as a thinking decider, using that process, I'm able to remove myself from this scenario, remove myself from this situation, and make a very detached and objective decision. And so as a result, as a thinker, I don't very often take things personally because I've removed myself. Now, sometimes when I should take things personally, I don't, but it's nice to be able to remove myself. Bill, on the other hand, liked to put himself into the situation and ask himself, if I was the person that this decision was being made about, how would I feel? How would this impact me? How would this be in line with my values and with what I think is important? And from that standpoint, that's how he would make his decision. So he was very involved in the decision, and I was very detached from the decision. So you can imagine how if we're making a decision that impacts, maybe negatively impacts people, how he may look at me and think, my goodness, how cold and dispassionate she is when it comes to making decisions. And I would look at him and say, oh my goodness, let it go. And until we were able to figure out how to make it happen and how to make it work, we had some pretty interesting challenges. Now, what about you? Do you have a preference for thinking, or do you have a preference for feeling when it comes to making your decisions? If your definition of fair is that every single person should get the same, then maybe you're like me and you have a preference for thinking. If your definition of fair is that every single person, no matter how many there are, should be treated as an individual and get exactly what they need and want, then maybe you're like Bill and you have a preference for feeling when it comes to making decisions. Think about the last time you were in a meeting that flared up. There was some conflict. Maybe you were in a meeting and something had to be decided. And there were 2 warring factions at the end of that meeting. And then nothing really gets resolved. Because people will go away from that meeting and have the meeting after the meeting, where you go to the water cooler and you talk about, those people who made the wrong decision. And you go off and you do your own thing. But guess what the other people are doing also? They're talking about you. and the way you behaved in that meeting. And they're going off and doing their own thing. And now we come back to the next meeting to talk about what we've done, and we start the battle all over again. You know, we talk about how unproductive meetings are and how they're such a huge waste of time, and yet we refuse to not have them. We're still constantly in meetings every single day for hours and hours on end. They're so necessary yet so unproductive. Is it because we have these different personalities that are almost attacking each other, if you will? When we come from totally opposite sides of the fence, then it's very difficult to break down those differences. And that's what we need to be able to do. If you think about your boss, and you're thinking about what's your boss's personality map, how does your boss make decisions? Does your boss make decisions based on what's the rule, what's logical, what makes sense? Okay, good, let's go, we're done, finished, and walk away? Or does your boss make decisions based on, you know, what about the people, and how's this person going to be impacted, and how is this going to affect, you know, so-and-so in such and such a department? And we're wondering, how does this all work? Maybe they have a feeling preference. So knowing their personality map and how it compares to your personality map is pretty important. Let's talk about the fourth and final area on your personality map, and that is your lifestyle. And when it comes to lifestyle, the choices are between judging and perceiving. I have a judging preference when it comes to organizing my life. I like things to be planned. I like things to be orderly. I don't like there to be surprises. I like to know what I'm doing, when I'm doing it, and I like to be able to follow that plan. You know, I'm the plan, the work, and work the plan. That's my mantra. Even my weekends. Maybe not the whole entire weekend, but I like to, you know, get my work done first, because only once my work is done can I enjoy the rest of the weekend. That's what I like. If things aren't organized quite right. Now, I have 4 boys. Nothing against boys, but they don't know how to load a dishwasher properly. Period. Now, I have nieces who know how to load a dishwasher, but I could never successfully teach my boys how to load the dishwasher the way I like the dishwasher to be loaded. Now, I've got to tell you, it took me a lot of years before I would not go in after them and rearrange the dishes in the dishwasher, because I like things to be so orderly. Now, you know, the way boys load dishwashers, they don't even get clean, period, so it made sense at that particular time in order to get the dishes clean. But really, if Bill were to come over to my house and he were to look at the dishwasher, he would say, oh, perfect. However they load it is great, because Bill's lifestyle was all about being flexible and spontaneous and going with the flow, and life is to be experienced and enjoyed, not to be controlled. Dawn, planning your weekends. You know, people like Bill invented the last-minute club. Wherever they wanted to go, wherever their inspiration happened to lead them, that was the way he would enjoy traveling. And whoever happened to be available to go with him, that's who he took with him. Me, I plan months in advance, if not years, if I'm traveling with somebody else. If I don't have my Christmas shopping done by October 31st, I am starting to go into convulsions. Bill is, oh, Christmas. Oh yeah, I guess it's October 31st. It's coming soon, isn't it? Yes, Bill, it is. It's coming soon. You have to prepare and plan. Oh, yes, I will. Now, the interesting thing about these 2 different lifestyles when it comes to a work perspective is that people like me who have a judging preference, we do our best work when we can methodically step through the project, hit all of the milestones without tripping, and make sure that we get done on time or in advance. And when I have that opportunity to work like that, I do my best work. Bill, on the other hand, if I force him to follow those methodical steps, he has a little bit of a mini meltdown. Because the way a perceiving person works the best is to be given an assignment, and then time goes by, and he does nothing. He maybe think about it, and then at the very last minute, he has this mad rush, and he gets it all done, and the annoying part for me is that it's brilliant when he does it. Because that's the way he works best. If I'm forced to wait until the last minute, you don't get my best effort, because that's not the way I like to work. But if you force Bill to work my way, or if you force me to work Bill's way, then we've got some trouble. But if we allow each other to work the way we each work best, now we've got some opportunities. But imagine having Bill and I working on the same project. I want to get started. I want to get things done. I want milestones met ahead of time. You know, the definition of time is different for these two particular groups of people. If I have to be at a 9 o'clock meeting, then for me, on time is that I'm sitting in my seat at 5 minutes before 9. I'm on time. Bill's definition of time for a 9 o'clock meeting, if he is walking through the door at 9 or even 9:05, I'm on time. When it comes to work styles and working with people, the mere fact that we have a different definition of time can cause a huge trouble. Think about your boss. When given a choice, are they always early, or are they always at the moment, or are they always late? If your definition of time is different or is opposite to your boss's, that's something you want to pay attention to, because it could cause some troubles. When it comes to your lifestyle, do you like things to be structured and planned and organized with no surprises and no interruptions, and you like there to be closure? Are you a list person, and if you do something that's not on the list, do you write it on the list and check it off, because the thrill of getting something done energizes you? If that sounds like you, maybe you've got a preference for judging. If, on the other hand, you like a work style and a lifestyle that's spontaneous and flexible and open-ended, and you like to enjoy whatever happens to come, and interruptions are welcome, and you like to just let life evolve, and you love the process, maybe you have a preference for perceiving. So now we have 4 areas on your personality map. The first is, where do you get your energy from? Inside or outside? The second, how does your brain prefer to bring in information? Detailed or big picture? The third area, what's the decision-making process your brain prefers? Deciding based on logic, deciding based on empathy. And fourth and finally, what is the lifestyle that you prefer to lead? Organized and structured, or flexible and spontaneous? When you understand your personality map, when you know what your gifts and talents are, when you know what makes you uniquely you, and when I know what makes me uniquely me, then we have the opportunity to really unleash our greatness by being able to have these marvelous interpersonal skills where we can get along with people because we understand where they're coming from. And we understand how that's different from where we're coming from. And we can change and we can adapt, and sometimes our personalities match, but sometimes they don't. Now remember, as I've described these 8 different preferences, remember I said at the beginning, we can and we do use all 8. But 4 of them feel as though we're writing with our preferred hand. It's easy and it flows. And sometimes, we're so in the zone, we're so in the flow of what it is that we're doing, that even those challenging days are rewarding because we've been so engaged. But then there are times when we have to work with people who have an opposite preferences to us. And the value in understanding our own personality map and in understanding the personality maps of other people is that we can choose to change our behavior anytime we like. So with Bill, I could be more extroverted, or I could bring him information in a big picture fashion. For me, if Bill wanted to assign me a new project, he knew he had to bring lots and lots of details, even though that wasn't his natural preference. For me, that's what he knew I needed. So to be a great leader and to unleash greatness in other people, we need to be able to unleash the greatness in ourselves. And what that requires is that we understand our own personalities and we understand the personalities of the people that we're dealing with. This is how we unleash greatness. Now, if you have any questions, this would be the time, and I'm not sure how much time we have left, a couple of minutes perhaps. If you have any questions associated with different personalities, different work styles, different ways of getting along with people at work, maybe you've got a particular family member, whatever kinds of situations or scenarios that you find yourself in, what kinds of questions do you have for me about understanding your own personality map and understanding the personality map of other people? I'll open it up. John, yes.
So, do you find that people that your example with Bill is perfect because you're actually at extremes? Do you find most people don't, like I was, fall sort of in the middle in terms of all these things? And how do you deal with that?
Fall in the middle in that we're different maybe on a couple of scales as opposed to all four?
We're not
or,
at the extremes. Like some person's slightly introverted and slightly extroverted at the same time.
Well, if you're both slightly introverted and slightly extroverted, then you're closer together. And what we find is that when people's personalities are more of a match, then the relationship is much easier. There's less conflict. We tend to think alike. We tend to get along without much trouble at all. And so when we're closer, I don't know, maybe if you've just met somebody for the first time and you feel, after 5 minutes you've known them forever, then possibly it's because your energies are matching, introversion, extroversion, and maybe there are other facets of your personality that are very much in sync. And so that could be an explanation there.
Another question.
Yes.
Now that you've left the position that you were in, and you found yourself in another position, would you say that you're a little bit more on the extroverted side?
People are often surprised to hear me say that I'm an introvert. And a lot of times that's because we associate the word introvert with shyness. In the Myers-Briggs world, that's not what introvert means. Introversion is very much about, where you get your energy. When I extrovert, so remember we can choose at any time to extrovert or to introvert, regardless of what we are or whatever our preference is. So when I have, spending time with a large group of people, I do find that my energy is drained. If I were Bill, he would be so energized after speaking to a group of people, after interacting with a group of total strangers. He would have such a high energy level that he would just be ready to go. Me, by the time I leave here today, my energy will be much lower and I'll have to re-energize myself with some quiet reflective thinking on the way home. The interesting thing I will add to that is that you would be absolutely surprised and astonished at the number of actors and speakers who are introverts. Because we can take on this role. We can be in a place where, first of all, I'm an absolute expert in my field, and so that deep knowledge, there's no concern that anybody will ask me a question that I can't answer. And so that puts me in a place of great confidence. And so sometimes we think, we hear those words, introversion and extroversion, and we think, shy and outgoing and boisterous or reserved or any of those kinds of things. And in the Myers-Briggs world, yes, it does have a little bit to play, but that's not what those words mean. But we can introvert or extrovert at any time that we choose. Yes, sir.
As far as the application of these 8 areas to the business world is concerned, I can fully understand I'm interested in is, how would you apply these, let's say, today's virtual world where you might have, let's say, a bus in Singapore, and the only way you can communicate is by means of video conferencing. Or people who have got mobile offices, they could be going to, in the summer, go to Wazega Beach and take their laptops and their cell phones with them, their notebook, and that's this is their office. So you're not directly interacting with these people. You're going to be sensing some of these areas, maybe from telephone conversations, from video conferencing, that you're not actually interacting person to person. So in situations like these, how would your theory be applicable?
Yeah, so how do you apply this in situations where you're not face-to-face with people, where maybe you're on a virtual team or you're dealing through teleconferencing? First of all, I think that in the teleconferencing environment and on the telephone, that you absolutely can pick up these same clues as to how you can interact with people. So on the telephone, for example, where you don't see the facial expressions perhaps of the person that you're talking to, and that can be a little bit more challenging. But do you hear the hesitation in somebody's voice? And so perhaps you have, if we're thinking on the introversion-extroversion as an example, if you were to ask me a question that I had to think of an answer off the top of my head, if we were on the telephone, what you would likely hear would be, me say a few words and then there would be a pause. And then you'd hear a few more words and then there would be a pause. And then I'd say a few more words and there would be a pause. And those pauses are places where I'm letting my brain catch up. So that's an indication, perhaps, that I have a preference for introversion. If you're on the phone with somebody who has a preference for extroversion, extroverts think out loud. And so it is tends to be a constant stream of verbiage where instead of a pause, there are lots of filler words and ideas that are floating around. So if you were to ask somebody, how can you apply this in a virtual environment, an extroverted conversationalist might sound like, well, if you were to put this in a virtual environment where perhaps, maybe you've got people overseas, or maybe it's not just people overseas, maybe you've got people that are working from home or people who are working on their teams, and well, no, it wouldn't only just be those, it would also be, these other kinds of people, and then what would you do in that case? Well, there's actually a few things that you could do. So how would that sound like from an introverted conversation? So what you're asking me is, how would this apply based on a virtual team? Well, if your team is across the ocean, then maybe we have teleconference capability. If we're not across the ocean and people are working from their cottage or working from their home office, then maybe we can have a conversation on the telephone. In that case, then we would be able to hear perhaps different speech patterns. So in those two examples, I'm not sure if you were able to pick up that the extroversion example was a constant stream of thinking out loud, where the introversion example was a comment and then a moment. Doesn't have to be a long pause, but just a moment, and then some more words, and then a moment, and then some more words. So you can pick up speech patterns and recognize how people think based on speech patterns, and also listening for the questions that people ask. So if we're thinking about, for example, the sensing and intuition, perhaps you're with a client. In a sales environment, this is particularly powerful information to have. In the very beginning of a relationship, you want to know, are they an introvert or an extrovert? Because you want to match energies with your potential client. That's the most important. At the very end of a sales cycle, you want to know, do they want closure, or do they, not want to make a decision until the very last moment? Well, it's not that they don't want to buy from you. It's perhaps that they have a perceiving preference and they don't want to decide until the very end. So in some of those scenarios, you can tell. But listen to the questions that people ask. So are people asking, questions about, well, who's involved? And what does it look like? And how often will I have to check in? And what's the telephone number that I will have to call? And what's the time zone? And if they're very detailed, factual, concrete questions, And that's an indication that I have a preference for sensing. If the questions are more like, okay, so what does this mean? So we've got this data, but what does the data tell us? That's what's the connection, and that's an indication that perhaps you've got somebody who has a preference for intuition as opposed to sensing. So when you learn how to recognize these clues, then there are lots of ways that when people are talking, they can give you indications as to what their preferences are. You're welcome. Drew.
What's a good reference for tactics? You gave us a bunch of tactics.
Processing, yes?
So what's a good reference for business tactics? Internet or book or something?
What's a good reference for business tactics that you can use to apply this information? So first of all, Google just rules the world. So if you Google Myers-Briggs, you will get, I don't know how many billion hits, or I don't know if you'll get as many as you would on Great, but there is just an inordinate amount of information on Myers-Briggs available on the internet. When you Google Myers-Briggs, make sure that you include in your search pattern things like using Myers-Briggs in meetings, using Myers-Briggs in sales, using Myers-Briggs to communicate, using Myers-Briggs in project management. And because there's just so much information on Myers-Briggs, if you give it that parameter of what environment you're in, then you'll get more information specific to answer your question. Is that helpful, Drew? Of course, you could always hire me to come in and I could, consult for you and tell you all kinds of things. One last question.
Is it possible that the breakdown of the Myers-Briggs is kind of more than 8 sometimes? Because I find myself difficult to put exactly in one of those in many areas. I mean, just giving you like an example, like the dealing with the crowd, as you said, the difference between introverts and extroverts.
Yeah.
I could be doing both, depends on the situation.
Mm-hmm.
Like when I'm giving information or getting information, I have no problem. I can be there, hours, days, I gain energy. But when let's say have to be in like a wedding ceremony or something, I'm just waiting for the time that I finish, and I lose the energy at that time. So how could I put myself in any of this?
Right. Okay. So the question is about when your preferences are closer, or there's no obvious difference, or you're in a situation where you have to use your opposite. Is that where you're not sure which is which?
I mean, it basically depends on the situation.
Depends on the situation.
Like,
Yeah.
That's why I can't say exactly, am I introvert or extrovert?
Sure.
It depends on the
Yeah.
situation.
Now the interesting, it depends, and in life everything depends. And I will say, thank you for the question, because it does give me the opportunity to say that Myers-Briggs is only one tool in a tool belt of many things that you'll use in order to be successful in life. And Myers-Briggs explains a lot of things, but it doesn't explain everything. Sometimes the situation is around, people that you don't like, or people that don't have interests that you're interested in. So I can be, for example, in an introverted type environment with people who don't know anything about the things that I know about, and so I don't have anything to talk to those people about. Even though it's what would seem like the right environment for me, the people are not engaging, and I'm not interested in the people or what they know. So there are many different factors that play into, do I feel introverted or do I feel extroverted? Because a lot of things can drain your energy, and a lot of things can energize you. The other thing that I would like to say is that, what we've done here is we've taken a very complex topic, and we've really stripped it out and tried to look at sort of 8 elements. When in fact, Myers-Briggs is a very complex and very dynamic theory that says how these elements interplay with one another. So the fact that, I use Bill and I because we're opposite on all 4, makes it easier to come up with different examples to help you relate and understand the 8. But how does introversion and perceiving fit together? compared to how does extroversion and perceiving fit together. Even though it seems like it's only a little bit different, it's vastly different because of how the theory is more complex than just 8 pieces of a puzzle, if you will. So there's lots of different answers to answer your question, which doesn't really help you.
I guess the answer should be in Google.
Yeah, everything's in Google. You're very welcome. I will stick around if there are additional questions afterwards. Please come and chat with me. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions offline one-on-one. More than happy to do that. And so at this point, John, I'll invite you up and hand things back over to you.
Well, thank you very much. That was it. Let's do a round of applause. Thank you very much. Let's go grab it. So a couple of things. I got a lot out of that, and I appreciate it.
Good.
We do a little thing here. I was curious if which you like, red or white, and I want to hear about your decision, red or white wine.
Red or white wine? Oh, golly.
That's
so
your
white.
extrovert. I saw you think.
No, that's my introvert. I need to think.
Introvert, sorry.
Red or white? White.
You're processing.
Processing.
Okay. Did you say white? Okay, great. Charlene, you want to bring up? Great. There you go. So thank you very much.
Oh, wow. Ooh, ask and you shall receive. Marvelous. Thank you, Charlene. Thank you.
So that's our way of, how we process information. In a slightly alcoholic state. So what we'd like to do is little points of business. We have an evaluation form at the back there. We'd like you to fill it out. I put a couple of questions, how you felt about tonight. I'm curious, I didn't put it down as a question, but I'd like to know how you feel about this venue. I'm very curious if you know any additional speakers. And then if you could pass that at the end to Charlene, that would be great. And also, we're about to do a draw for another bottle of wine. Charlene, does everyone put their business cards in? If you have a business card. Oops. Okay, so if Don, if you wouldn't mind drawing for the second bottle of wine. Fermenting.
Linda Gin.
Oh, there you go. Great. Yay. Okay. So if you want to stick around, there's coffee and cookies. Feel free to do so. And Charlene, is there those little CDs?
I was told by that channel that these are free prizes because you can come out. It's a CD thing, stories I tell.
Compliments of that channel. So thank you very much.
So they're over here.
Yeah. So other than that, we will see you at the end of November. Feel free to plug into our series at any given time. That's a wrap, and feel free to stick around and chat with Don. Okay, thanks, guys.